Hey students, this is going to be just a quick kind of review section by section of chapter 25. You had asked for something to make sure that we at least briefly hit each of the areas of the textbook, so that's kind of what this is going to deliver. Let's go. So Road to World War I, we talked about Maine, those four causes of war. Your textbook goes heavy into nationalism and imperialism, um, those rivalries that are naturally created when you have imperialist empires trying to make grabs of land, etc. Uh, Also goes into the militarism. For the first time in Europe, we see large-scale standing armies. And when you get a bunch of armies together, it's only natural that leaders are going to say, okay, this is a viable option to use them. And so we see that much more so moving into the modern day. Also, the self-importance of leaders, the idea that there is inflexibility. Some of these generals become kind of larger than life, and like I said, more willing to use those standing armies. The outbreak of war based on the Balkan crises, the sense of pan-Slavism going on there, the breakup of the Ottoman Empire, the reduction in power of Austria-Hungary. Austria is forced to allow Hungary to help it be a dual monarchy. The possibility of it using the Slavs in kind of a lesser capacity is also out there, put forth at least by Franz Ferdinand. Then we see the assassination of Franz Ferdinand, the ultimatum that is given. It's this level of brinksmanship, knowing that you have a standing army to back it up. You're much more willing to go to the mat and say, no, this is exactly what we want here. Here's the line in the sand that we're drawing. The war itself, illusions and stalemate, nationalism, this idea that this is bringing our country together, this is who we are, being more important than actual strategy or looking at the war from a new perspective. Also, we went into the idea that this trench warfare is going to be a defensive tactic. It's the machine guns, the advent of the machine gun, the formation of these much, much larger, more intricate trenches than ever before, those are defensive ideas. And yet they're coupled with an offensive strategy. And that's just not going to work. It's like if you are a football coach and you have a really, really great defense, but yet you decide that you're just going to throw the ball all over the place and it's going to lead to turnovers left and right and put your defense in a bad spot. That's basically what's happening here. The Great Slaughter, this is where we see that trench warfare. Textbook really goes into the routines of it. This is not something simply, um, you know, haphazard. This is planned. You have the morning shelling. Morning, guys. How you doing? Here's some artillery shells. Hey, we're climbing over the trench now. We're going to let you guys know. Okay, thanks. Then we see the war begin to widen because of that stalemate and the race to the sea along the Western Theater, along France and Germany, and through Belgium and the Netherlands. We see Great Britain, Winston Churchill attempt to open up a second front at Gallipoli, trying to unite their allies. Doesn't work. The year-long battle that goes nowhere. Entry of the USA, unrestricted submarine warfare, the sinking of the Lusitania, the Zimmerman telegram that eventually brings the United States into the war. And again, it takes about a year, really, for the U.S. to get cranking, but the U.S. does, to some degree, help to swing the tides of war. In terms of the home front, total war being everybody is involved in the war effort. That's conscription, meaning that it's not just volunteers. You're actually drafting people into the army. The war machine, the idea that all of the production is based around the war. That's food, that's materials, ammunition, any leather, silk, etc. That is all going to the war effort. Rations to make sure that there's enough for the war effort. And military leaders becoming government leaders. The military leaders of these places saying, here's what we need, and the government's complying. And eventually we see a crossover there where those military leaders are going to become government officials and attempt to kind of run things from a military perspective. The propaganda that is used, internal disagreement, civil liberties kind of goes along with the previous point, the idea that military leaders are now in control of the government. Nothing else matters. Those civil liberties, censorship of papers who are anti-war. They're painted as being anti-nationalist and anti-country. And so this is the way that it's done. And so we see how governments are taking a new tack. Even though we've had all of these liberal ideas, these civil liberties come up, the governments are now going to kind of put a stamp on them in a more conservative viewpoint. Propaganda. You see a propaganda poster here. The idea that this isn't really a war that you immediately jump into. World War II is, okay, Nazis are bad people, they're doing these bad things, yes, let's jump in. Hitler's trying to take over the world. Yes, we must stop him. It's much more of an innate will to go and fight. Whereas World War One, you really had to convince people to a degree. The kind of feelings that we read about in pre-World War One, yes, there are these great nationalistic feelings and whatever, and so people are going to be swept up to some degree. But um, there's a lot of also just like, yeah, all right, war, sure. Social impact, we talked about women yesterday. The economy, social classes, all of those are going to be affected by this. Women gaining labor rights, gaining suffrage in some areas after the war. In terms of economics, we see the middle class getting hurt. The upper class, though, because they're basically winning government contracts by saying the government, hey, we need all of this stuff. The bigger businesses are the ones that can get it done in a shorter amount of time, so we're going to support them wherever possible. War and Revolution, so this is Russia. Russian Revolution, the failing military of Russia is leading to discontent within Russia, and discontent specifically with the Tsar. They blame him and his family, and he's not, and that's not far off. Remember, a lot of these guys are three of these guys are first cousins, and so we see the beginning of workers forming these Soviets, these influential kind of mini union type parties. Then we see the women on their bread march and things like that. That is all influencing the shift away from the monarchy of Russia. The Bolsheviks, this political party that's created, they are going to directly look to socialism once Lenin gains control over the party, over the group. So skipping over the overthrow, the revolution, skipping over this the bourgeoisie being involved and linking with the government. That all that's gone. Those Marxist ideas. We're just going to go right from where we were right to socialism, whereas Marxism kind of sets up a step-by-step process on how to get there. So the Bolshevik Revolution, it's based on taking over of the government. It's I don't want to say it's a coup, but it's kind of a coup. Um, they end up signing the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. They have to give up Poland basically and a lot of other land um, in signing this, but they're not in a position to do much more than that. They're failing. The war is incredibly taxing. People are dying, and not just people who are fighting in the war. There's not enough weapons to go around. The military-industrial complex is not set up by them. That's a term, military-industrial complex, that eventually is created by Eisenhower in his farewell address, but the idea applies here. So they signed the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. The whole idea of the Bolsheviks is get us out of the war. Civil war is going to be red versus white, red being the Bolsheviks, white being the nationalists, but it's not really clear cut. There are all of these different political groups within Russia, and they're all trying to affect change. It's just the Bolsheviks and the Reds are much more organized than anybody else, and that gives them a huge inherent advantage. These other groups are split apart. They're not all on the same page ideologically, and so it makes it difficult to create a united front, even though they greatly outnumber the Reds. The royal family during this time period is eventually killed, secreted out. They were already under house arrest, but taken out, killed, buried, dug up, reinterred. No, Anastasia did not get out. Sorry, Disney is wrong. She was killed as well. Last year of the war, German Spring Offensive, kind of their last push to try and actually earn a victory as opposed to having to deal with suing for peace. And we see those revolutions in Germany and Austria-Hungary as well. The fears of socialism and communism from Russia have made their way over to Germany, and we see political parties trying to link together, actually, though we think of Russia and Germany as enemies pretty much throughout the 1900s. This sense of nationalism is still kind of there, but is very much dampened by the advent of war. Where the nationalism does turn to is being not so much pro us, but also anti anybody else. And so that's going to be influential in terms of the next 20 years or so. Peace settlement. The U.S. in all of this, the big three, the U.S., Woodrow Wilson, he wants peace. That's his goal. That's how he outlines his 14 points. That's the idea behind the League of Nations, to make sure something like this can never, ever happen again. For France, they're all about safety. They're worried that Germany is going to take them over once again, and so that's their goal in all of this. So what do they end up wanting? Well, they want to destroy Germany's army so that they can't build it back up again. Great Britain. Great Britain wants money. They want war reparations, and so they're willing to go to the mat on destroying Germany's economy in an effort to get paid back for everything that they spent on the war. In addition, they veto one of the lines of the 14 points, which understood that nationalism was still there elsewhere, and that countries shouldn't control colonies unless those colonies want to be controlled. Um, Great Britain says no, like that's not a part of it. We need to recoup our losses, and our colonies are a way to do that. Fear of socialism is going to be widespread throughout Europe during this time period. We see that with groups forming in Germany, and that's going to be part of the rise of Hitler. Is look at these socialists. It's not just the Jews. Look at these socialists out there. We have to have a strong government, united government to put them down. League of Nations, interesting idea, does not work. When three of the biggest countries in the world, most powerful countries in the world, US, Great Britain, France, don't agree to the League of Nations, that kind of puts a damper on the whole thing, and the 14 points kind of goes by the wayside. Treaty of Versailles, after it's signed here, we have the war guilt clause, Germany being forced to admit that they were at fault, and they look around at like Austria, Hungary, and Serbia like, really? What about? Okay, fine. And there's really nothing they can do about it. But it is a great embarrassment, and that's really going to kind of force us into World War II. Other peace treaties that are made between separate countries. So while there were 39 countries to the Treaty of Versailles, not all of them are a part of that particular treaty. They additionally create other treaties with each other. Germany and Russia are going to lose land. The Ottoman Empire is gone. The Middle East is kind of split up. And again, this goes against the ideas of self-determination, of nationalism. It's a lack of enforcement, really. There's an argument that your textbook makes that it's not so much that the Treaty of Versailles stunk, but that the enforcement of the Treaty of Versailles does not go well. Pretty quickly, Germany is going to build its army back up, et cetera, et cetera. Also, the feelings of isolationism, um, especially this is talking about the United States here. U.S. doesn't want to get involved in another one of these, so they're very reluctant. Congress is reluctant to say to Woodrow Wilson, "Yeah, okay, you can do this cool thing that you've created." And granted, there would be faults and flaws with the League of Nations, but they basically say, "No, we don't want to be beholden to these European countries anymore. We will never jump back into a conflict like this ever again. Trust us, it will never happen ever again." Sarcasm. That's just a quick review of the textbook chapter. If you have any questions, let me know. Have a great day.